The spirit of 1776 was largely spread by the works of Thomas Paine with his work called Common Sense, but there's also another, he's the author of something else that he wrote down in France in 1792, and he also addressed it to George Washington, which was the rights of man, and this work really goes into a lot of details that really explains why we have a Bill of Rights, which is not to give us and grant us rights, but to protect our natural rights. And he says that anytime a political association becomes against the common wishes of the people, that we can break that association. He says, posits that the popular political revolution is permissible when a government does not safeguard the natural rights of its people. And he goes on to define what those natural rights are. Now, you know, a lot of times people think the United States just came about, you know, just haphazardly, and they don't really understand. It wasn't a matter of the luck of the draw, like, hey, it just happened. You know, these were, the United States really came about due to ideals that were posited in the minds of the public, and a lot of these ideals were spread by Thomas Paine. Now, you're never going to find any founding father that is absolutely flawless. Everybody is human, but what you got to look at is the total aggregate of what they were about. You know, one thing I would have to point out about Thomas Paine does not have a marble statue or bronze statue of him. He's probably the only founding father and probably the most influential in many ways, except for maybe Thomas Jefferson or George Washington and Ben Franklin, that, you know, it's almost ludicrous to think that he isn't, you know, immortalized in bronze or marble somewhere. But I think a lot of the problem is with that is the established oligarchy of today does not like the ideas of Thomas Paine being spread to the populace because it's a danger to their inherent rackets today. And we'll show you what I mean by that right now. Here's the works from Thomas Paine's Rights of Man. And I think there's 17 of them he enumerates, and that doesn't mean there isn't more than that. But number one, he goes on, men are born and continue free and equal in respects to their rights. That's kind of like a broad generalization, but it sets the tone. Two, the end of all political associations. Now that's something you hear about a lot on YouTube, about the false left-right paradigm, where basically, you know, people are getting on the blue team, the red team, or whatever it is, and they're fighting for who the leader is going to be. Basically, Thomas Paine is saying the end of all political associations is the preservation of natural rights of man, liberty, property, security, and resistance of oppression. So in other words, when you get into the left-right paradigm, you're actually voting for oppression. He's not really saying that, but, you know, like a lot of people today are actually bringing that up, and actually they're not, you know, a lot of information is being hidden because they don't like this information. This is why I think Thomas Paine has really been, he's not like totally hidden from history, but he's more ignored than you'll hear about George Washington or you hear about Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson, I think, is really, you know, he goes hand in hand with everything Thomas Paine said. But you don't really hear much about Thomas Paine. And here it goes on number 3. The nation is the source of all sovereignty. In other words, the people themselves are sovereign. He's not talking about, you know, us being subservient to a ruling class. And, you know, he's actually something, he is pro-nationalistic. That's another ideal that the globalists today don't like. But political liberty consists of the power of doing whatever you want that does not injure another. Now, you'll see this advocated quite a bit by, what is that channel? Impact Flicks, Vlog, whatever it is. I don't know, I think he had his original channel knocked down, but he's a big advocate of this. And, you know, it's true. I mean, you know, that's the way I look at it. I think they took the word liberal and they kind of made it into something else what it shouldn't be. I think they you know, like, I personally think the liberal, as defined in the original meaning before it became a political word, it just meant that, hey, do whatever you want. Sort of like on a beach in Southern California back before they had all the signs out there, you couldn't do this, that, and that, like the beach was in Southern California in 1963. You know, just do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting somebody else, no problem. That's what real liberty is. So, number 5, the law ought to prohibit only actions harmful to society. What is not prohibited should not be hindered. Now, look at how many laws we got on the books that are hindering what you can and cannot do. One of the examples, I don't know, I forgot his name was Chris, whatever his name was, on the Impact Vlogs. Might look at his channel. I look at a lot of his videos, actually, to tell the truth. He talks about the weed plant being banned. Now, I don't smoke any weed, but I don't think weed should be banned in the least. I'm not an advocate of somebody smoking a lot of it, but I'm an advocate of actually growing the plant and using the oil, or even chopping up the leaves and putting them out as an herbal condiment, a healthful herbal condiment. I'm an advocate of that. I think any medicinal plants should be allowed to be grown at any time. Actually, I think anybody should be able to make their own moonshine, whatever, too. That was outlawed later on. So, in other words, you could actually make an excuse why it's harmful to society. You can make an excuse that you're exhaling air in the form of CO2 is using up the oxygen or something, and you're harmful to society. If you really want to get nitpicky, but that's how they get away with making too many laws. Anyway, but that's basically what he says, that if it's not harmful, it should not be prohibited. The law is an expression of the will of the community. All citizens have a right to concur. In other words, it's supposed to be not just the rule of the oligarchy. It's supposed to be rule of true representation. That's one of his axioms. No man should be accused or arrested or held in confinement except for determined by law. In other words, it's not like, hey, I don't like this guy because this person is trying to knock me out of being on a committee for this, or I don't know, maybe the Chamber of Commerce or whatever it is I want this guy removed out of the way because he's a detriment to me. But if it's not against, it's got to be a law that's common to everybody that you violated the law. And that's in other words, that's the way the rights should be, that the laws are applied equally. The law ought to impose no other penalties such as are absolutely and evidently necessary. Now, you can see some of the penalties for law today is like, it's, well, you can see the progression even over the last 50, 60 years. I don't think, people should drive drunk and there should be a penalty for it, but, that's become I don't drink at all, so don't drink at all. So it doesn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. And I don't smoke cigarettes or weed, and if they tax cigarettes a lot, it doesn't affect me. But I don't think they should be taxing tobacco. But they got excessive on this DUI stuff. Sometimes it's like, if a person has one drink, which is heavily taxed by itself, they're getting thrown in prison or jail, and they got to go through classes, and the classes are owned by the judges, and you know what I mean. You're all making kickbacks and everything. If it's not, the punishment needs to be just for whatever it is. Every man being presumed innocent until he's been convicted. Of course, there's trial by media. That's stuff too. That happens a lot. Oh yeah, Judge Kavanaugh. Remember that? Trial by media. And he's not a perfect saint. I'll tell you that right now. He's not. But just like anything, you got to opt for the best, the best, the least of the evils. Even he's not a perfect saint. No man ought to be molested on account of his opinions. That's YouTube is not that bad on this. Well, compared to Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr, YouTube is like the bastion of freedom of speech. It's not perfect. I'm not saying I wish it was more open like it used to be a few years ago. But you can see that the tech giants are really guilty of this. Boy, they are really knocking down opinions they don't like, But that was Thomas Paine's words, not mine, okay, 1776. But, you can see how, if Thomas Paine was around, he put this in, like, more modern, flowery language that millennials will understand, it would be probably instantly banned on Facebook and Twitter. That's a fact. So citizens may write, speak, and write and publish freely. That's kind of not going on today, too, according to with the tech giants, And even, like, I put out the video about Soros and how he criticized the tech giants and how he's pro-weed. And, I'm thinking, I'm not saying I'm a fan of George Soros, but he's got a couple things we can at least agree with. And I'm getting pummeled with people. And I'm, like, thinking to myself, if you ever met George Soros, and you want to just concentrate on something that you agree on, say legalizing marijuana or getting a more, I know he might not be really for open discourse on the internet, I know this, but if you say you had a chance to meet him and you say, let's just concentrate on what we got common ground on, a lot of people would just immediately try to kick him in the shins, and definitely you would never get nothing done. I mean, at least take the stuff that you agree with on him and move forward with that. And the other stuff, you could tell him, George, you're wrong, but we agree with you. We like you on this one part. And I know about all the other stuff you told me in the comments. God, I already know that. I'm not bringing that up on YouTube. You're not allowed to do that stuff, okay? What do you think I am? What do you think I can do over here? I can tell you a lot of stuff, but I can't, okay? I'm kind of like under the King George's filtering system here, too, So, the public force is instituted for the benefit of the community and not for a particular benefit of the persons whom it is entrusted. Oh, God, you can imagine that one going over. In theory, the congressman always writes back. He says, you're a servant. Yeah, right. That's cute. There's always something going on where they're making a lot of money. Oh, they all are. All these representatives are making a lot of money on the side over different things, including Rick Scott, who I'm going to wind up voting for because I can't stand Bill Nelson. I can't stand Rick Scott, but it was like lesser of two evils. I hate saying I'm going to vote for that guy, but he's guilty of that all the way. Republican, and what am I going to do? What am I going to do? We're screwed, right? Anyway, contributions for defraying the expenses of government ought to be divided equally amongst members of the community, according to their abilities. Now, this was kind of like what the 13th Amendment was, the 16th Amendment was about. The 16th Amendment was about 1913, with the passage of the income tax. It was supposed to be a graduated progressive income tax, and it wasn't like that. In the beginning, it may be like that a little bit, but, in the beginning, there was just like, you pay a percentage, there was no, head of household, no, deductions for members in a family, no itemized expenses, no standard deduction. It was just 1%, And of course, they complicated the hell out of it, so they got loopholes for the wealthy, so it doesn't work out that way. 14, every citizen has a right, either by himself or a representative, to be a free voice in determining the necessity of public contributions. Now, this was something actually the Confederate Constitution really addressed a lot, which was like appropriations for money, or appropriations of funds for various sectors of the government, to run various sectors of the government, or to get on to new public works projects, had to be fully transparent. They had to be clear in the title of the bill and in the language of the body, the language of the bill, what the spending was going to be for. There was not going to be any omnibus blanket spending bills with a hodgepodge of all kinds of different, items in there that are unrelated. It had to be one specific item, one specific topic per each bill. If you want to do something else, you want to vote on something else, it's not like we're going to make a compromise. Well, I don't like what you got, and you don't like what I got, so let's all just put it all in one bill. We can vote on and each get what we want and spend ourselves into oblivion and debt. That was actually addressed in the Confederate Constitution. They would have put an end to that garbage, and we wouldn't be in over $21 trillion of debt today. So, despite whether you like it or not in, the CSA, the reality of it is that we're spending ourselves into oblivion, that we're not going to even have a government. It's going to be broke. It already is broke, but who knows when the ride is going to be at the end. 15, every community has a right to demand all its agents on account of conduct. Yeah, that's something that you would think is an axiom, but it's definitely not an axiom. As Trump tweeted way back, never got over the fact that Obama was able to send $1.7 billion in cash to Iran. Nobody in Congress, the FBI, or Justice called for an investigation. Trump is actually becoming far more of a patriot than I suspected him to be. I mean, I'm still like, I kind of like say, well, I'm not going to go head over heels and just worship the guy as my, oh, Trump, you are God. No way. But, he is far more of a patriot than I expected him to be from the beginning. But nobody's perfect, and things can change pretty rapidly. We can get somebody 180 degrees away from him and undo everything he did, which is one of the problems of having too strong of an office of the presidency, which is something we're not supposed to have, right? But here here's Trump talking about $1.7 billion in cash to Iran. Nobody in Congress and the FBI even called for an investigation, just sent them the money, right? So, in other words, that was one of the tenets that Thomas Paine was talking about. In other words, the community has a right to demand all of its agents an account of their conduct. Well, account of their conduct could be, I don't know, Bill Clinton and White House interns too. I don't know. I got less problem with that than spending money left and right. Anyway, every community in which a separation of powers and security of rights is not provided wants a constitution. So, in other words, the only reason you really have a constitution, or in other words, there's really only two forms of government. There's oligarchy, and there's a constitutional republic of laws where rights are guaranteed. Not made or created by the government, but embodied in the law. Their natural rights of people are embodied in the law of government, and the government's function is to protect the equal rights of people. That's a constitutional republic. All other forms of government really are some type of oligarchy. If it's a king, it's not just the ruler by one, it's a ruler of the king and his advisors. If it's fascism, it's the fascist leader, but it's still he's got his advisors around here. If it's communist, it's got the communist advisors around here. No matter, all these other isms and stuff with communism, fascism, monarchies or whatever, there really are oligarchies. And actually today in the United States, what we have is a financial oligarchy. It's who has the most money to back the candidates, that's who gets in office. Even at the level of the House of Representatives. We should actually have many, many, many more in the House of Representatives and Congress. If you look in the U.S. Constitution, it says that there should be no more than 30,000 constituents for each member of the House of Representatives. Today, we have way over 700,000 constituents for each member of the House of Representatives. So, how does it, sure, you can email your representative on the web and you get back a thing, yes, as your servant, I am there to protect and serve you. Well, yeah, whatever. But, obviously, he can't freaking answer to 750,000 people, It's got to be, it's supposed to be 30,000 or less. That's really what they said right in the Constitution. There's a reason for it. This way, people got better control. And the money can't influence, it'd be tougher for the money to influence, that many representatives. As it is, it's pretty hard for them to influence 435 representatives in the House and 100 in the Senate. But even so, if there was like, 1,300 representatives, they'd have a real problem. Anyway, the right of the property being inviolable and sacred is no one ought to be deprived of, except in case of evident public necessity, like eminent domain. The power company's taking over your land because we need it. Anyway, but you know what I mean. In other words, your property is sacred. That's in the rights of man, per Thomas Paine. You can see a lot of this is kind of like embodied in the Bill of Rights in some ways. Of course, not all of it, but some of it is, and actually a lot of it's implied in other ways. It doesn't say a lot about defense, though, which is one of the most important things when it comes right down to it. Things need to have teeth. But, it's cool that he has all this. And, if he was alive today and he was on Twitter or Facebook, he might have a lot of followers initially, but then that's what happened with Thomas Paine. That's exactly what we got a problem with today, I don't even understand how these people are thinking anymore, man. It's like, God, it's getting so ridiculous. It's, I was going to make a separate video on this, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to say this here. In the economy, they'll say that there's 7 to 10 year cycles on a stock market, okay? And sometimes it's maybe up to 11 years. And then there's also major economic cycles of 60 to 70 years. Like 1873 was a Great Depression that lasted till, I don't know, maybe the rest of the 1870s. And then the next time it started was, I could say the beginning was 1929, but it was more like 1932 when it really fully hit. Maybe, 70 years or so. And then the next one should have been around 2010 or 2012. And we did have a reset in 2009, 2010, but things have been staved off with, zero interest rates and a lot of quantitative easing at one point in time, and the bailouts to the biggest banks. But that really just bought more time. And what I'm seeing is with this is not exactly that axiom about the 70-year cycle on the economic cycle, the larger economic cycle. But really what's going on is as each succeeding generation is eating off the fruits of the previous generation, has it easier and easier and easier, they lose that work ethic, that industrial nature, the ability to self-sacrifice and persevere, in fortitude, independence. The people no longer have that because they're living off the fruits of the labor of the previous generation. Now, if you look back, an American war between the states, the first really bad depression that was more in modern, semi-modern times was 1873. That was caused by the massive expansion of the railroads, because when the northern money interests were won, they were able to tap into the federal subsidies, 70 federal revenue stream with subsidies. Oh God, subsidies. I'm thinking whatever. But with subsidies money from the federal government, they were able to tap into that and unbridled. There was nothing to stop them, because it was settled that the South doesn't have any political power anymore. That's what really happened after that. So it led to an unprecedented boom in railroad building. Was 33,000 miles of railroad track. But eventually, even the federal subsidy money was not enough to keep the boom sustaining itself, and the speculative boom sustaining itself, and the bubble finally busted in 1873. But that led to, back to going to austere, hard times again. And you can see what happened by the time we got to 1920s. 1920s was an era of unprecedented, immorality, basically. There was big, large industry, and there was a lot of economic power, but there was a lot of immorality. Now, if you're looking at how things have went from the 1940s till today, it's unimaginable what things are from the 1940s till today. It's unimaginable. And it's almost as if you're comparing the 1870s to the 1920s as you're comparing the 1940s to 2018 to 2020. That is one of, and if you look at it, that's like the inner core of society's fortitude, virtue, and work ethic, whereby people are just going to self-sacrifice and put off for later the taking the fruits of their labor. Just keep working, keep their head down, and keep working. Today's generation is not like that anywhere near. Although some of it's starting to have to be that way. We are basically right on the cusp of another major economic downturn. It's not because of like the numbers per se. It's like each generation has gotten weaker and weaker. Now, I'm from the baby boomers generation, which is weaker than the traditional generation. And I know the newer generations criticize the baby boomers, but I can tell you one thing. If you look back in the 60s, if you lived in the 60s, what is shown on the media with the baby boomers acting like, irresponsible, barefoot hippies smoking weed and doing nothing, that was definitely not the case by and large. That is only what the media picked up on their cameras and wanted to emphasize. That is not the case at all. So, the boomers are light years away from the millennials, and the traditional generation of the 30s and the 40s are much more hardy than the boomers are in general. Although you're going to find in every, I'm talking in generalization, but that's really why the cycle starts to happen again, because the people have lost that industrial fortitude, that entrepreneurial go it alone. You know, I'm a lone wolf. I can freaking do the job, even though I wasn't trained to do it. I'll learn it on a job. You know, people today want to know, oh, I need some training. Well, 90% of this, she's more like 99% of the stuff I learned, which I'm kind of like a jack of all trades and master of only maybe a couple of trades, is hands-on trial and error, school of hard knocks. So, and I can tell you one of the hardest things that was most difficult for me was when I got out of the Marine Corps and I forgot everything I learned about accounting, and I had to go back into that field again, and everything was computerized. Talk about getting back on a fast-track learning curve. That was a B&a-half, man. I can tell you that right now. But that's why we have these large economic long-term cycles. The generations just lose their tough, independent mindset, rugged individualism. They just lose that. And they want to be taken care of. Or they want to live off what somebody else did. They got used to that. The boomers had it way easier than the World War II and Depression era generation, but a lot of the kids that the boomers raised are worse than the boomers themselves. That's how bad it's gotten. So, that's one of the problems we got here big time. And, getting back to the spirit of 7076, it's going to take a major shockwave to, wake people up, I guess, whatever, or just throw them into the quagmire where they're going to have to sink or swim. So I wanted to bring out these words of Thomas Paine. It's not the only thing that's out there because, you could talk a lot more about the Bill of Rights per se. I think it's even got more in there. But, Thomas Paine really was the spirit of 1776. And if he was alive today and he was writing that same stuff on Facebook, and, Zuckerberg would say, yeah, you can't be on there. Immediately. That's what Zuckerberg would do. So, and Twitter. I don't have Twitter and I don't have Facebook. And I'm like, forget it. I mean, I'm the hell with it. It's like, I don't even know what it does. I got this YouTube, but I think the YouTube is, for my channel, it's kind of a hodgepodge of many different things. And a lot of times I think actually one of the best things I'm putting out here is some of the health stuff and some of the how-to videos because they can actually help people. Some of these other, videos that make you aware, quote unquote, they could be useful, but I don't like concentrating on them too much because it's almost like bringing out a problem. I mean, that's all you're doing is bringing out a problem. I mean, what are you going to do about it, man? We're pretty much screwed today, and I don't have the solution. I don't know. I mean, some people think Donald Trump's the only solution. Well, right now he looks like the best you can hope for. I'll say that. He definitely he's not that bad, man. He's not that bad at all. I mean, I thought he was a little more of a BS artist than I thought in the beginning. I mean, but I'm not so stupid to believe that he's going to be able to do everything he said. So I wasn't disappointed when some of the things didn't happen. But anyway, just keep a positive outlook. And, if you look at what happened in the country in 1776 and also what happened in the country in 1861 with a four-way political race for the presidency, man, things were way worse back then. Way worse. Oh, God, man, infinitely worse, man. It's like, but, it could actually go back to that situation because the debt situation in our country. That's that's the crux of all the problems, going to be the debt. So anyway, over and out. And I think Thomas Jefferson is, I'm Thomas Jefferson. Well, he might as well be Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Paine. And also Mason, I think his name was Mason in Virginia. He actually wrote the original Virginia Declaration, where a lot of it was taken from Mason's work in Virginia. I think it was Mason. It went into Thomas Paine's works in the Declaration of Independence and also in the Bill of Rights. As far as Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine is really the one that really spread the ideals throughout the nation, the early young nation, where people were thinking of themselves previously as British subjects, and then they started thinking of themselves as independent and free Americans. This is the only time in history, in the United States, you can bitch all you want about it, but it's the only time in history that we actually broke away from an oligarchy. It's never been done, ever, in human history. Never. Even under the Roman Republic, it wasn't anywhere near as good as it is in the United States. Trouble is, we took 5 steps backwards when the South lost the war in 1865. And there's a lot of covering up of really what went on back then. It's not exactly the way the oligarchs who finance history have been, swaying the public to think. So anyway, over and out. And again, I think this is just some great food for thought. Have a nice day.